you. I'm Yin. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Georgia. Before we get started, I also wanted to take some time to explicitly acknowledge how the identities of the panel and how different intersecting identities may affect the way that social media is navigated and experienced. For example, women, men, non-binary people, we all have different experiences on social media. Additionally, people of color, and specifically women of color who study hot topics like critical race theory or other critical theories, have been often attacked and doxxed on social media. And so we just wanted to say, keep this in mind during our discussion today, and also when you're interacting online. Now, today we have three wonderful panelists here to discuss academia, social media, and personal branding. First up, we have Dr. Benjamin HEDDY. He is an assistant professor of educational psychology at the University of Oklahoma. He explores cognitive and motivational aspects of learning, including engagement, academic emotions, and interest development.
Next, we have Dr. CARLTON FONG, who is an assistant professor at Texas State University. He studies student motivation and its sociocultural and structural determinants in post-secondary context with a methodological emphasis on meta-analysis.
And then finally, we have Dr. SHARON, who is an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. She studies the development of motivation and self-regulation, with recent work focusing on these areas of student belongingness and writing motivation. She's also the author of Why Aren't You Writing? Research, Real Talk, Strategies, and Shenanigans. And you can check out the chat for a link to her book there.
So our discussion today will follow three sections. First, our discussion with our panelists, a chance to have your questions answered. Feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go through if you haven't already. And then also a collective exercise in building your personal brand. So let's get started. The first question, which we can, if you want, we can stop sharing the screen. The first question is actually to you, Dr. ZUMBRUNN. What does personal brand mean to you in the academic context?
Oh, goody. I'm so glad I get to go first. I was like, got my notes ready for CARLTON and Ben to chat. Personal brand. So, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us today. I will say what it means to me. So I think, like, in a nutshell, what brand means to me is kind of akin to somebody so they're talking about something in a conversation, and then your name comes up, and then the other person doesn't know who you are, and then they say, you know, the person who does blah 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 blah. That to me is somebody's brand. Is so whatever the blah 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 is for you, that's your brand. So to me, it's something that you hope that you have a little control over, but sometimes there's your brand gets away from you, so to speak. And there's, like, when people are trying to think of who you are and what your brand is, they essentially define you. And so when you can be explicit about that, about you're the person who blah 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 blah, that and your brand, then I think that helps, like, harness it a little bit more.
Love that, Andrew. Thank you. I think I like the idea of the blah 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 and trying to then pick
yeah, that's actually my brand. You can't have that. Sorry.
And then to Dr. Fong, to you, same question. What does personal brand mean? But then also, how do you curate your personal brand on social media, very generally?
Yeah, great question. I mean, second what Sharon said, I had a more like boring definition, not like a cool story. Boring, yeah, that's not what my personal brand should be. But I kind of described it as like the essence of who you are as a scholar and what you stand for. And for me, I was thinking like one key aspect is it has to be concise. Like you can't go on and on for minutes and minutes describing your personal brand. Like it needs to be like within one sentence, right? And so for me personally, I would say part of my personal brand is like the interdisciplinary fields of education that I've tried to combine, whether it's ed psych, motivation, higher ed, or like methodology. Like all of these are areas that I kind of graphed together to kind of form my own personal brand, scholarly identity. And I think one way to kind of, at least for me, because of this interdisciplinary nature of my personal brand, I think it's staying active in social media in the various subgroups in which all of those fields kind of those spaces work, and so following people in these areas and these areas, and being intentional about the ways in which I engage different people, different scholars in the various spaces I have my personal brand in. So
awesome, thank you for that. Quick follow-up to what you just said. So one is, I heard the notion of being pithy. You should have these nice sentences that kind of give you everything. And then you said being active, but I'm curious, you mentioned being active in specific communities of practice, or that you allude to that. Where do you find them?
Great question. Yeah, it's kind of a snowball, right? It's like once you start finding one person, like for instance, I'm really interested in like writing motivation. I'm going to follow Sharon, right? Because Sharon, I know, is one of those experts in that area. But once I follow Sharon, I see kind of the folks she's replying to or the folks she's retweeting. And I'm like, aha, now I can snowball and then follow her peeps and so forth, right? And so once you kind of find one, okay, I'm going to nerd out with like social network, like the one key node or so, right? Then you can kind of snowball out from there.
Great answer. Dr. HEDDY, what about you? How would you define personal brand? Yeah.
I think Dr. ZUMBRUNN and FONG covered it perfectly. Just to add to it, and everybody's taught how to give an elevator speech, right? So you go to a conference in 30 seconds. Can you say what your research interests are? Can you say what your dissertation's about? That's kind of what your personal brand is, right? Your elevator speech is your description, your bio, and on your social media site. And academia is all about the personal brand. So we are all free agents, and we don't have an agent. And so it's up to us to promote ourselves. And I know it sounds funky. It has a yucky feeling a little bit, right? Like promoting yourself, but you have to in academia. No one's going to do it for you, except maybe your advisor if you're lucky. So it's up to you. How are you going to advertise yourself? It's through your personal brand. What are you all about? We all have a really specific, specialized research interest and program of research. How do you get people to recognize that and associate that with you? Mine's all about motivation and transformative experience and conceptual change. And that's really obvious through my social media. And back in the day, you built your brand through publications and presentations, right? Or going to conferences a couple times a year. Now you have an opportunity through social media to constantly build your personal brand, and in a continual process. So to your second part of your question, how do you curate that? I curate that in a lot of different ways. So one of the ways is through the use of hashtags. I'm kind of known as the ed psych jobs guy, right? I started that hashtag a while ago. And the nice thing about hashtags, if you go to my profile, my hashtags are in there, hashtag ed psych jobs, you click it, it'll list every ed psych job that there is this year. And so it's a cool way to curate your brand. Another thing I'm known for is teaching, right? Actually, I have another hashtag called Teachers of Motivation that Dr. Fong started. He started that hashtag and suggested I use it. So I started posting all my motivation teaching materials on there. And now I'm known for that, right? Because it's a place, it's a thread that you can create just by using a hashtag. And it's a cool way to curate your personal brand.
Thank you for that. I have another question, sort of a follow-up to that. So you had just discussed how in previous years, the way that you communicate your brand, a lot of the times was going to conferences and presentations, but now we've sort of moved to this like social media space. And so what has sparked your all's interest in, you know, becoming a part of that space and communicating your ideas through social media?
I can jump in first. So first of all, it's just a good way to get information out. You know, when you publish an article, 100 people read that journal, and that's who's going to read that article, right? Now you have a few thousand followers maybe, and you can post that article and you have a much wider reach. So it's just a good way to get your research out into people's hands. It's a good way to share non-academic research or non-research academic things. Before social media, there was no way to do it except through email, right? Or talking about it. Just like the teaching hashtag that I use, social media gives an opportunity to share non-research academic things with people who might be interested. And so that's really great. And then it's a great way to network. And that's what it takes to get a job, is networking, right? And during a pandemic, you can't go to a conference and introduce yourself to people. And the online conferences just aren't as good for that. We've all learned. But social media is a way that you can network, and it is a way to get to know people and get to meet scholars and have conversations with them that you might otherwise not be able to have.
Yeah, I'll go next. I would just totally second the networking because it's such a good tool for that. And I want to also follow up on what I was saying before about creating a brand and how I think you're so right, like your elevator talk. And I remember where I was, what I was wearing when I was instructed to like come up with my like 30 seconds. I was like, oh God, how do you do that? Like there's no way I was in graduate school and I was just never going to be able to do that, I thought, especially to somebody important. And no, I'm not kidding. I know exactly where I was and what I was wearing because I was like broke out into hives, I think. So I need y'all to know that wasn't something that I had early on. It was well after graduation when, like I was saying, like my brand kind of caught up with me more than I created my brand. And sometimes your brand can be like, man, this is what I'm known for. Can I escape it? But that's maybe for another conversation. So when I started using social media, embarrassingly, it was just like, just on Facebook, and created a Facebook group, and yeah, like that's adorable. But that was the way I like could connect with people, right? And so from there, I just started to use different social media channels, but I use them all really, really differently. And so I use the social media channels to like think about getting for a specific purpose. So it goes back to something that Carlton mentioned about being really intentional. I use each social media platform very differently, particularly like who's on it and how I want to reach them. There's only one that my grandma's on, and so that's really only one that I don't do like brand businessy nerd stuff. So I would just say that like I do that less about it pushing my work forward, to be honest, and more about it's a kind of a creative energy of mine. Like it kind of soaks up some of that creative energy. I don't know about y'all, but when I write journal articles, they are yawn boring. So so it's just like a different way for me to write and a different way for me to interact with other scholars in a maybe not so like button up way. And I really appreciate that. And that again, it lets me be a little bit more authentically me than I feel like I get to be in my journal articles, if that makes sense. So networking and creative and kind of the combination of those things, I would say is my answer.
Dr. Zumbrunnen, I want to point it back to you because you made a lot of great comments around how you use different social media platforms for different purposes. And I'm curious, very explicitly, how do you use social media to support your academic goals?
So I have, like I said, I still have this ongoing Facebook group called Unstuck Academic Writers. That's where it started. And then I like slowly branched out to Insta, like toe dip. And so I would say my Instas, both. I have lots of, I say I post the same things I do for Get Out of Here, Ben HEDDY, stop it, love it, thank you, friend. That I post a lot of unstuck writing things on Insta. And I've, very recently, like I've been creating these TikToks, but only recently posted one like yesterday, I think. And so it's really like and it's all about just kind of connecting with the different people on those social media sites, because some people they're like, oh, I would love to join your Facebook group for this community, but I don't do Facebook. And I'm like, okay, well, there's another community over here. So the one I use probably the least, and the one that I think others do really, really well, and I'm a little jelly about it, is Twitter. I wish I could do it better, because I think that is the one that reaches so many people with scholarship. And so the things that I share are resources, the things that I share are upcoming events, the things that I share are ridiculous asides that, because it's hard to write. And so I think people thinking about writing need a little humor now and again. So that I post like ridiculous things. And I would say like, that's what I post on my more regular social media channels. I'm curious to hear Carlton, Ben, I'm curious to your strategies.
Please.
Yeah, definitely second the publication alerts. I think those are really huge. Tony Perez at Old Dominion keeps telling me that like studies that get tweeted out get cited more. Like there have been studies. I should like find the study that I keep referring to, but I'm just gonna like correspondence with Tony Perez will be the citation. And so I think that's true. I want to believe that. I would also add more like research to practice as well. I get always surprised about how many teachers, instructors, practitioners are on Twitter or are doing, both academic journeys and teaching at the same time. So one cool story was I actually wrote a conversation piece. It's like a academic-led news article. And I had promoted it on Twitter, and then a high school teacher, I'm forgetting exactly where, I want to say Nevada, but a high school teacher from Nevada, he responded to me saying, hey, I just read this article and I want to assign it to my high school students this week for class. And they're going to write like a reflection on your article. And I was just like, done for the day, like win, like that is so cool. And what was really neat was he de-identified the reflections and then shared them with me after. I mean, they were really short little like one paragraph things, but like I read 30 high school students like responses to my article, and just to see like their understanding of motivation now. And it was just really superb. And, like that would not, like no one's going to read Ed Psych Review like in a high school, but they're going to read this piece, and it got promoted all through Twitter. And that's how that whole thing went down. And so I think all of our academic goals is to, influence like real change and practice. And so I think that's just kind of a neat story that I think was only possible because of Twitter. So
Yeah, and just to add to those two things, one of my main goals on social media is to create community, and to join community. And so, a hashtag does that with job seekers, a hashtag does that with teaching, but it also does it with practitioners, like Carlton was saying. So when teachers follow me, I follow teachers back. When principals follow me, I follow them back. I'm trying to be a part of the larger education community. And in doing so, I've had a principal reach out to me and say, I'm really interested in your research. Can we talk? I've had teachers reach out to me, engineering K through 12 teachers, and say, oh, I'm really interested in the engineering ed study you did. Can we talk about it? And it's led to research studies to happen. And so don't be afraid to follow people back. I personally, my own personal style is I'm not one of these people who wants 10,000 followers and I follow 100 people. Those people kind of creep me out, cult leader style. So instead, I prefer if you follow me and you're doing anything at all that's related to what I'm doing, if you're an educator, I'm going to follow back because I want to create a community, not a following. And then the other thing I've started doing recently is trying to fuse with other communities. So at first I was all about ed psych, but now I'm trying to get my research into the hands of and to collaborate with scholars in other communities. My newest one is with criminal justice scholars, other areas of psychology, economics, law. I've started following these folks and they'll follow me back, and we started conversations about research and how what we do is related. And so that's kind of my goal, and it always has been, of being a scholar, is creating community and joining community, and social media is the perfect place for that. And then the last thing I'll say is that I believe ed psych, and if you're not an educational psychologist, that's okay, but I believe ed psych is so powerful. Everything is learning and motivation, everything, right? And so I've recently been trying to create these videos to share on social media so people can see how relevant and impactful ed psych can be. So motivation, I've created a couple videos. I just did one on how to write lit reviews. And so creating these videos, social media gives you an opportunity to get it out to a way wider audience than you would otherwise.
Yeah, I keep seeing this theme that social media is a place for community. And that's something that is, I guess, of crucial importance, especially given the last year or so that we've kind of gone through, where we haven't been able to communicate with each other in person. But from like a graduate student perspective, it can feel, I guess, somewhat intimidating to sort of find your community on social media. And so I'm curious about, how can graduate students make those connections? What advice would you give a graduate student who's sort of new to this space, who's interested in building that community for themselves?
So I don't think it hurts to just kind of put yourself out there, and you can take a toe dip into the conversations pretty easily on Twitter by just kind of liking it or lifting up somebody else's voice, like you agree with them. So to me, those are pretty low hanging fruit, like low risk activities to like being a part of a conversation. Twitter is just they're all just such different beasts. across the platforms, but I think Twitter is a pretty easy one to understand, to follow. And I don't know, I don't think it has some of the trickiness where like you friend somebody before you can actually participate in the conversation. And then you might get your feelings hurt because that person might never friend you back. It's less of a, risk in that sense with things like Twitter, because you can just jump into the conversation however you feel comfortable.
Go ahead, Ben. The unmute is like the new hand raise. So I think you beat me to the draw.
Okay, I would say definitely get on social media. I advise all of my graduate students in my lab to join social media. I don't require them to, of course, but I advise them to for the networking purposes. I would say to make the most of it, don't be afraid to interact. Follow people. If they post materials, say you think it's interesting or cool. If they post a conversation, a question, a poll, respond to those things. That's how you get your name out there. So don't be afraid to jump into the conversations. And then if you're new to it, you're trying to figure out who to follow, look at who other people follow. So other educational psychologists, pull up their profile. It says followers, following, look at the following, and see who they follow. That'll be a good way to create a list of people to connect with.
Yeah, one thing, this is kind of maybe I'm weird, but I think a practical thing, and we'll talk about it later, is definitely put information on your bio, because if you want people to follow you back and start building out your network and community, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but how to definitely put stuff there that's useful to the community you may want to form, and then also post some things, because I think for me, if I look at someone's profile and there's nothing on the bio and no posts, I'm like, no offense, but I'm just probably not going to follow you because there's nothing to follow yet. So, but before you get there, you should probably put some stuff there that kind of speak to your brand, right? So the post could be a retweet of an article that you really like, or something about your university, anything like that. That can really kind of get academic, Twitter academics, kind of okay, I could see myself engaging with this person. So, so definitely put a foot forward. I would say it doesn't even have to be your best foot. Just put something forward, and I think that will at least kind of get the ball rolling, I would say. And then direct message. Oh my gosh, most people have open ones, I think, or you have to be a follower, I think. That's so fun. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a direct message with so-and-so. That's just crazy. But people will respond. I try to always, I think. And so so I would say don't be too afraid of that. So
a lot of this conversation sort of revolves around the Twitter space. But Dr. Zumbrunn, you had mentioned that you've also found community and social media in other spots, such as Facebook or Instagram. And so what are the pros and cons of those different platforms, and where would you suggest we start?
So I think it's less about pros and cons and more about individual comfort and which platform you like the best. And so they just, to me, so the strengths and weaknesses of the platforms. Oh my gosh, Corey, so adorable. The strengths and weaknesses are really individual to me and how I use them, and less about their true limits, perhaps. But I would say get started with every I would get started with at least the one social media channel that you feel most comfortable with. And I'm pretty sure I speak for the other panelists, but you can add me. I would love to be your first friend if you're brand new to it. Like, happy to add. And I totally agree with what Carlton was saying, that I definitely like see a follow, look at their profile. And if they don't have any posts, and I'm like, but I am looking, I almost, no matter what, if it says ed psych, I'm like, yes, I follow. So I follow the ed psych back, because I do think our community is growing there. So I think like, I think an easy one for me personally, I think like they all can be just kind of voyeur. Like you can just kind of hang back for a while and just see if you like it, which I think is a real benefit. So you can just get used to it. And so, and then start engaging in the one that you feel most comfortable in. That's probably the answer you don't want, because I'm not saying anything specific, but I like the more open platforms like Twitter, for just kind of like the toe dip. And then if you're committed or you're using it for other things, then you can see who else is on with like Facebook or Insta. I'm personally pretty drawn these days to TikTok, because I've learned a ton on TikTok, and I cannot believe all I've learned on TikTok University. So I just have been moved to be just like okay, I want to participate now. I've been a voyeur now for 6 months, thanks COVID. And now I think I can do this. And it's taken me a while. Like, oh, when people are like, oh, you're on TikTok. I'm like, no, I'm not on it. I just like to watch it. And now like, I'm excited to like start to participate more in those conversations and see where those communities go. So probably a frustrating answer.
No, I think that was very helpful, and sort of kind of on the same like vein of that. So you were talking about like different comfort on social media. And so I was curious about, so we have our academic lives on social media, but we also have sometimes our personal lives on social media, who we are, who our family members are, what we care about. And so how do you find that balance of like what's appropriate to discuss or share with other people? And does that depend on where you're sharing it?
So I guess I'll just jump in. Oh no, Carlton, you go.
Oh no, well, I'm boring and just have Twitter. And when I saw this question, I was like, oh, the other social media I use is ResearchGate and Google Scholar. So that's how cool I am. So I just have Twitter, and I'm pretty, actually, this is one of my tips. I would say be authentic to yourself, but for me, like I don't share a lot about like my family or like my home life, but that's just me. And so I'm like purely just like academic stuff, academic satire, but like no, like these are my 2 daughters kind of thing. So, but which is cool. Some people do, and I love seeing them, and they're like adorable, but I just haven't broached like merging my personal with academic on Twitter, but I think it's a personal decision and comfort level. So
yeah, and I keep some social media like Insta for family and friends, and that's it. And then for Twitter, that's kind of my professional space. And I would say I totally agree with Carlton to keep it professional, but with the caveat that you want to be a whole human being, right? So things that are important to you personally, you can, of course, you can share those. You can share anything you want. My preference is to share a little bit of that just so you can get a look, but then focus on the professional stuff. Try to keep it appropriate. And a little lesson on that is, if you read it and you're like, I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, it's not appropriate, right? If you're even considering whether or not it's appropriate, it's not appropriate. And so I try to keep it appropriate, and you never know how people are going to interpret stuff. So I think we got a later question on that. And then your animal pictures, always post your animal pictures. That's how you get the most followers. Everybody knows my dog Mango. He's more famous than I am.
Dr. Heddy, question back to you, because you spoke a lot about, or the allusion to having a specific profile that has a role. So if it's my Twitter role, if my Twitter profile is for my professional space, if it's my Facebook, it's a personal one, et cetera. So I'm curious, what are some of the cautions that you take when using social media, and how do you navigate those challenges?
Yeah, so again, keep it appropriate. And if you're unsure, that's my number one rule. You can always have a friend look at it, say, hey, I made this joke. Is it crass? But if you're asking yourself that question, I probably wouldn't post it, especially as a grad student in the position you're in now, just because people interpret things in weird ways. Read your tweets carefully. Don't go after people. That's a big thing for me. If somebody's posting about learning styles, right? We all hate learning styles, but don't like be mean to somebody about it on Twitter. And in my opinion, call them out publicly. I might DM them and say, hey, have you read this article? You might check out this article on learning styles. But I want to be like compassionate and nice and not make anybody feel bad. So I never go after anybody. I don't publicly shame anybody, because it's just a good way to get a bad reputation for not being collegial, and that can sink you really fast. A lot of people don't know this, but a huge part of getting a job is people thinking you're going to be like pleasant to work with for the most part. And so if you're unpleasant on Twitter, you're probably going to be an unpleasant colleague, and that'll sink you really fast. And then one more, and this is a huge one, time management. It's really easy to get on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook and TikTok, and then spend hours on there. And then you look up and it's been an hour. I call it going down a rabbit hole, right? So try not to go down rabbit holes all day. And while Twitter and social media are a great way to network, it's not what in the end gets you a job. It's really the research that you do and the teaching you do. And so it can contribute to you networking and maybe getting a job, but you really need to be doing your research. So don't spend all day on social media and not doing the things that actually get you a job. So that'd be my caution, and some advice on how to do that. If you're on it too much, take it off your phone. Only get on it when you get on your computer, and that can be helpful. Delete it off your phone or block it. I like to block it I block websites from my Google. And so some of them are Twitter, US News, Facebook, ESPN News, things that I'll just get on and sit there and go down a rabbit hole. So just be careful that it doesn't eat up all your time.
Yeah, along with professionalism, I would just say like the rage tweets, like, you could draft them up, but then like delete them. And so I think there was one where I got this grant rejection and I was reading the reviewer comments and I was like, I'm so ready for a rage tweet. And I listened to Ben on my shoulder there and said, don't post it. And I listened. And so yeah, so I would say, Twitter can be a dumpster fire or a hellscape. Like there's, some pretty toxic stuff out there. And I would say try not to contribute to that. So.
Agree.
Dr. Zumbrunn, sorry, you have nothing else to add?
Just mostly that I just agree about keeping it professional, and it's so important, especially if you're going to be on the market. Just don't play around. It's so public and it's so easy to be taken the wrong way. So I would keep it super G, at least until you have a little bit more protection. And what do I use the different sites differently? Absolutely. Twitter's I would say I almost am never on Twitter or responding on Twitter unless it's to do with my job. And honestly, all of my posts on TikTok will be the same, but they're more a blend of learning and ridiculousness, which is kind of my brand. And then Insta is, I would only have Insta for, only have Facebook rather for like family outside of that one group. And then Insta is a little bit of a mix. So I definitely use them differently and see them for different purposes. Corey, you asked a question, do I see different engagement? Not necessarily, because of things that I post across those three work, things are pretty similar. But I would not, you can't post. So we've been talking about posting a recent article. That's a great thing to post on Twitter. It's almost impossible to do the same thing on Insta. You can do it, but it's really not going to translate the way it would on Twitter. And so you just kind of use those platforms a little bit differently. And I've never seen anyone share a research article on TikTok. And maybe I'm just following the wrong people, but
sounds like a new avenue.
Maybe I'll look around.
Well, I appreciate a lot of those comments, and I'm hearing a lot of be professional, rage tweeting, be thoughtful. And I also appreciate now, Dr. Zumbrunn, we've confirmed what is your blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculousness. So I'm glad that we finally got there. We're going to shift now to answering some questions. So if you, as a participant, as an audience member, have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll be going through and grabbing those and asking them. But just to start us off, Dr. Fong, let's go to you. The question quite simply that we got from one person over Twitter was, how much social media engagement is enough or too much?